12-year-old Priya sits on her grandfather Nagesh's sun-drenched rooftop terrace in the small coastal town of Assagao, where the Arabian Sea hums softly against the shore. Together they fold broad betel leaves into glowing lanterns, turning clumsy mistakes into woven beauty, while Nagesh shares quiet stories of his late wife and the Sao Joao festivals of his childhood. As twilight deepens into gold, Priya discovers that some memories live in the rhythm of hands rather than words, and that peace can be found in the gentle sway of coconut fronds. Settle in for a soothing evening of intergenerational warmth and the quiet magic of handcrafted light. The green folding begins. The betel leaf split under Priya's thumb, a clean green tear that ran straight to the midrib. She swore under her breath and pressed the edges together, but the tear stayed. Across the low wooden table, Nagesh didn't seem to notice. His hands moved in their own slow tide, folding a leaf into the shape of a small, glowing boat. His thumb rubbed the waxy edge first, a habit he had repeated 10,000 times. Then his fingers turned the leaf over, creasing it along a line that existed only in his muscles. The terrace of the Gownkar house smelled of sun-warmed tile and the salt that the Arabian Sea sent up every afternoon. A coconut frond swayed above them, casting shadows that moved across the floor like slow animals. Priya watched the shadows instead of her own leaf. She had been here 3 days, and each afternoon Nagesh laid out a basket of fresh betel leaves from the vine behind the house. Each afternoon she made a mess of them. "Boor," Nagesh said, not looking up. "The leaf knows what it wants to be. You only help it find the shape." Priya tried again. She took a new leaf from the basket and laid it flat on the table. Her fingers felt thick and stupid. The leaf was cool and slightly sticky, and it resisted her. She pressed harder. It tore again. "I don't think leaves want to be lanterns, Ajoba," she said. "I think they want to be leaves." Nagesh smiled without showing teeth. He held up the small boat he had finished, turning it in the light. "Then you must convince them. With patience." From the narrow lane below, a voice called up to the terrace. "Nagesh Kaka, look what I brought." Miguel de Souza appeared at the top of the stairs with something in his hands that looked like a lantern, but wasn't. It was made of clear plastic and thin wire, and inside it a small LED glowed a steady white. He set it on the table next to the betel leaf boat and tapped his fingers on the railing. "Battery-powered, waterproof, lasts 60 hours on a single charge." Priya leaned toward it. The light was bright and even, nothing like the soft glow that would come from a candle inside Nagesh's leaf lantern. "Miguel," Nagesh said, folding his hands in his lap, "you always arrive with something to prove. Not prove. Share." Miguel leaned forward, his eyes bright. "The Sao Joao festival needs new energy. Young people won't carry leaf lanterns that fall apart in the rain, but they'll carry these." Priya reached for the LED lantern. It was light, almost weightless, and the glow felt warm against her palm. She thought of the leaf she had just torn. She thought of the hours Nagesh spent folding leaves that would last one night. From the corner of the terrace, Grasa Mendez adjusted her glasses and raised her camera. She had been there since before Miguel arrived, sitting on a low stool with her back against the wall. She framed a photograph of Nagesh's hands at work, then clicked the shutter softly. The sound was small, like a beetle tapping on wood. "Nagesh," she said, tilting her head to catch the light on the finished leaf boat, "may I take one more? The way you hold the leaf, it looks like you're holding a bird." Nagesh paused. His hands stayed still on the leaf, but his eyes moved past the terrace, past the coconut fronds, to something Priya couldn't see. He rubbed his thumb over the leaf edge once more, the motion automatic, and then he folded his hands in his lap again. For a long moment he said nothing. Priya watched him. She had seen this before, in the days since she arrived. Sometimes Nagesh would stop mid-sentence and look at the sea, or at the vine, or at nothing at all. When he came back, his voice was softer, as if he had been somewhere quiet. "Ajoba?" she said. He blinked and smiled at her. "Sorry, Burr, I was thinking about your Aji. She used to say the same thing Grasa just said, that my hands looked like they were holding a bird." Priya didn't ask more. She had learned in 3 days that some stories lived in Nagesh's silence, and you had to wait for them to surface. Asha Naik sat at the edge of the terrace, her legs crossed, her back against the wall. She hadn't spoken since arriving with Grasa. She ran her fingers over something in her pocket, a smooth shape that clicked softly against her thumbnail. Priya glanced at her and saw a piece of sea glass, pale green and worn by the tide. "Priya," Asha said, her voice barely above a whisper, "may I show you something?" Priya moved to sit beside her. Asha took the sea glass from her pocket and placed it in Priya's palm. It was cool and smooth, the edges rounded by years in the sand. I found this after the last monsoon, Asha said. It was a bottle once. Now it's this. Priya turned the glass over in her hand. It was beautiful in a quiet way, the kind of beauty you had to look for. Broken things can become beautiful again, Asha said, if you give them time. Priya looked at the sea glass, then at the torn betel leaf on the table, then at Nagesh's hands, which had started folding another leaf. She thought of the leaf lantern that would glow for one night and then be thrown away. She thought of the sea glass that had taken years to become smooth. Ajoba, she said, returning to the table. Why must the lanterns be made from leaves? Why not something that lasts? Nagesh stopped folding. He placed the half-finished leaf on the table and folded his hands in his lap. He studied her for a long time, his eyes warm and steady. Because the festival is about light that doesn't last, he said. About the moment. The leaf lantern is beautiful because it is temporary. If it were permanent, it would lose its meaning. Priya considered this. She watched the LED lantern Miguel had brought, bright and durable and weightless. She studied the leaf lantern, fragile and green and glowing soft in the twilight that had begun to gather on the terrace. I want to try again, she said. Nagesh's smile was small and quiet. He pushed a fresh leaf toward her. Priya took it. She laid it flat on the table. She rubbed the waxy edge with her thumb, the way Nagesh did. She pressed her palm against the leaf and felt its coolness, its life. Then she folded. The leaf resisted. It tore at the corner. She swore again and started over. Nagesh said nothing. He watched her, his hands folded in his lap, his eyes warm. Grasa clicked another photograph. Miguel tapped his fingers on the railing and looked at the sea. Asha ran her fingers over another piece of sea glass in her pocket. Priya folded. The leaf tore. She started over. The twilight deepened. The first lantern glowed faintly on the table, its candle lit by Nagesh's careful hand. Priya leaned her head toward him as he began a story about the Sao Joao festival, about the children who carried leaf lanterns through the rain, about the light that didn't last but meant everything. She listened. She tested the weight of his words. She folded another leaf. The tear in the leaf. Priya's fingers moved faster than the leaf could tolerate. She pressed the broad green surface against the rough concrete of the terrace railing, using it as a brace while she tried to crease the fold Nagesh had just demonstrated. The betel leaf was slick with its own natural wax, cool against her palm, and she could feel the veins beneath her fingertips like tiny rivers mapping some miniature landscape. Her grandfather sat across from her in the cane chair that had belonged to her grandmother, his hands folded in his lap, watching without speaking. Press with your thumb, not your nail, Nagesh said quietly. The thumb is softer. Priya adjusted her grip. She pressed again. The leaf resisted, curling back toward her instead of folding away. She pressed harder. A coconut frond swayed overhead, its shadow dancing across the table, and Priya's eyes tracked it for a fraction of a second, just long enough. The leaf slipped. Her fingers closed too tight. There was a sound like paper tearing, sharp and sudden, and the betel leaf split down one side with a clean rip that seemed to echo against the gentle hum of the Arabian Sea. Priya stared at the torn leaf. She pressed her palm flat against it, as if she could smooth the damage away by sheer will. The tear remained. Her lower lip pressed inward, the way it did when she was trying not to cry, and she tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear with trembling fingers. Ajoba, I've ruined it. Nagesh unfolded his hands from his lap and reached for the leaf. He picked it up with the same care he might use to lift a sleeping cat, his thumb rubbing once over the waxy edge before he began to fold again, not the fold he had shown her, but something new. He took the tear and turned it into the lantern's seam, weaving the damaged edge into the design so that what had been a mistake became part of the structure. My wife used to say that every tear has a purpose, Nagesh said, and his voice softened, the way it always did when he spoke of her. She taught me this trick 30 years ago, on a terrace much like this one. She said the leaf remembers where it was broken, and if you fold with that memory instead of against it, the lantern becomes stronger at the place it was torn. Miguel had been leaning against the railing with his arms crossed, tapping his fingers against the concrete in that impatient rhythm of his, but now his hands stilled. He watched Nagesh's fingers move, slow, deliberate, each fold a small act of patience, and something in his posture shifted. The urgency that usually lived in his shoulders seemed to drain away. He studied the LED lantern he had brought, bright and perfect and factory-made, and then at the leaf lantern taking shape under Nagesh's hands, imperfect and alive. That's, Miguel began, then stopped. He gestured broadly, as he always did when words failed him, and shook his head. I didn't think you could mend it like that. You could mend almost anything, Nagesh said, if you don't rush. Grasa had her camera raised, the lens pointed at Priya's face and Nagesh's hands, but as she watched Priya's expression change from frustration to something quieter, something almost peaceful, she lowered the camera. She adjusted her glasses with one hand and smoothed the edge of her sari with the other, choosing to witness rather than record. Some moments were too small for photographs. Asha had been sitting on the low wall at the terrace's edge, her feet dangling over the side, running her fingers over pieces of sea glass she had collected after the last monsoon storm. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a single piece, smooth, frosted, the color of pale green tea, and held it out to Priya. "Broken things can become beautiful again," Asha said, her voice barely above a whisper at first, then warming as she continued, "if you give them time." Priya took the sea glass. She ran her fingers over its surface, feeling how the sharp edges had been worn away by years of tumbling in the sand and salt. It was smooth now, almost soft, and she could feel her breathing slow as she held it. Nagesh continued folding the lantern, his measured voice filling the space between his movements. He told the story of his wife's hands, how she could mend any tear so perfectly that the repair became the most beautiful part of the lantern, how she would sit on this same terrace long after the sun had set, her fingers working by the light of a single candle, making broken things whole again. She believed that the mending was more important than the making, Nagesh said. Anyone can make something new. It takes patience to make something broken into something better. Priya placed the sea glass on the table and picked up another betel leaf. Her movements were slower now, deliberate, and she pressed her palm flat against the leaf's surface before she began to fold. She mimicked Nagesh's rhythm, the pause, the press, the gentle crease, and when the leaf resisted, she did not force it. She waited. She listened to the way the leaf wanted to move, and then she moved with it. The Arabian Sea hummed in the distance, its rhythm blending with Nagesh's storytelling, wrapping the terrace in a lullaby of memory and craft. The candle in the first lantern flickered, casting soft shadows that danced across the table. Somewhere below, a dog barked once and then fell silent. Priya folded. The leaf did not tear. Nagesh placed his hand on Priya's shoulder, his palm warm and heavy, and spoke a single word in Konkani. Daya. Patience. Priya understood without translation. She continued folding, her hands finding the craft's gentle rhythm, and the lantern took shape, imperfect, mended, beautiful, in the way that only something repaired with care can be beautiful. "Ajoba," Priya said, holding up the finished lantern. "Will it hold a candle?" Nagesh smiled, and the candlelight caught the silver in his hair. "We will find out tonight, Burr. We will find out if the light we make can survive the wind." Stories without words. The leaf Nagesh chose for the larger lantern was broader than the others, its surface marked by a faint silver vein running diagonally from stem to tip. He held it out to Priya without speaking. She took it, pressing her palm flat against the rougher underside, almost like sandpaper. Twilight had deepened while they worked. Coconut fronds above cast shadows that stretched across the terrace floor in slow, deliberate arcs, shifting with the evening breeze. They were building a lantern big enough to hold 2 candles, a shape Nagesh called adobara, double light. It required 4 hands working in counterpoint, one folding while the other held the tension. Priya had learned this the hard way an hour ago, when she'd tried to fold too quickly and the leaf buckled, sending 3 completed seams unraveling back into flat green. Nagesh had said nothing, simply picked up the ruined leaf and started again, his thumb rubbing the edge as he always did before a fold. "Ajoba," Priya said, her voice low, matching the quiet settled over the terrace. "Tell me about the Sao Joao when you were small." Nagesh's hands were already moving, creasing the broad leaf along its natural fold lines. But his eyes had drifted past the terrace wall, past the neighbor's bougainvillea, toward the thin line of the Arabian Sea, visible between 2 coconut palms. His fingers continued their work, press, crease, tuck, but his attention had gone elsewhere. The silver vein caught the last orange of the sunset, and he followed it with his gaze, as if reading a map. Priya waited. Over the summer evenings, she'd learned that some of Nagesh's stories arrived whole, in one unbroken thread, while others came in fragments scattered across nights like seeds waiting for rain. She did not prompt him. She folded the leaf he had given her, matching his rhythm, her hands learning the patience his silence demanded. Below, a radio played a Konkani film song from 3 decades ago, the melody drifting up through the warm air. Grassa's camera sat on the low table beside a half-empty cup of tea, lens cap on, the black ribbon of the strap coiled neatly. She had been clicking through roll after roll of lantern making since dusk, but at some point stopped. Now she sat with hands folded in her lap, smoothing the edge of her sari absent-mindedly, watching the leaf in Priya's hands take shape. "I was going to ask you to hold still for one more shot," Grassa said softly, her konkani carrying the soft Portuguese cadence that marked her family's centuries in Assagao. "But then I realized I would rather watch." Priya smiled without looking up. The leaf resisted slightly at the corner, wanting to curl back on itself, and she pressed harder, feeling the fibers give under her thumb. Miguel moved into the terrace space with the restless energy that always announced him before his voice. He carried 2 lanterns, one a Betel-Leaf creation finished earlier by Grassa's brother, the other his own, a translucent plastic shell strung with battery-powered LEDs, waterproof and bright, designed to mimic candle glow through leaf. He set them side by side on the table and stepped back to compare. The manufactured lantern burned steady, its light even and white-blue, untroubled by the breeze that made the candle flame inside the Betel-Leaf lantern dance and gutter. But the Betel-Leaf lantern did something the LED could not. It caught the flame and scattered it, the light filtering through the thin green membrane in uneven patches, brighter at the doubled seams, dimmer where the leaf stretched taut. The whole thing seemed to breathe with the wind, brightening and dimming in a rhythm that felt alive. "Look at that," Miguel said, leaning forward, fingers tapping once on the table edge. "The leaf catches the light differently. It's not just illumination, it's texture." Grassa tilted her head, catching the play of shadow on the wall behind. "Your LED is cleaner, but this one tells a story." Miguel nodded, his urgency softened by something like respect. He had argued for weeks that the festival needed new lanterns, brighter ones that wouldn't tear in the monsoon wind. But standing here, watching the candle flame filter through the green, he looked less certain. Asha sat near the terrace edge, legs crossed, a small bag of sea glass at her feet. She reached in and drew out a single piece, pale green, smoothed by the sea into an oval the size of a thumbprint. She held it to the candle inside the Betel-Leaf lantern. The light shone through, casting a soft green glow onto the leaf's surface. The lantern seemed to hold a small moon inside it, green and gentle. "I've been thinking," Asha said, her voice barely above a whisper, then warming as she spoke. "What if the lanterns carried something inside them, not just light, but a piece of the shore? Sea glass, shell, something that belongs to Assagao." Priya leaned toward her. "Like a pendant?" Asha placed the sea glass carefully beside the lantern, then picked up an amber piece and held it against the leaf. The amber light was warmer, richer. For a moment the lantern looked like it held a small fire inside. Nagesh's hands had not stopped during this exchange. Now the dobra was nearly complete, its double chamber shape taking form under his fingers. He set it down gently, folded his hands in his lap, and looked at Asha's sea glass with something like wonder. "When I was your age, brr," he said to Priya, his voice returning from wherever it had wandered. "The whole village square was lit with lanterns like these, not just a few on a terrace. Every house, every balcony, every window ledge, hundreds of them. During Sao Joao, the square looked like the sky had come down to earth." Priya pressed her palm against the nearly finished lantern, feeling the warmth of the fold lines. "What does Sao Joao mean, Ajoba? I know it's the monsoon festival, but why the lanterns?" Nagesh's eyes reflected the candle glow from the first lantern on the table. He spoke slowly, each sentence measured like a fold. "Sao Joao celebrates the rain. The monsoon is not just weather, it is renewal. The earth drinks, the crops grow, the wells fill. The lanterns are thanks. We light them to say, 'We are here, and we are grateful for the water that sustains us.'" Miguel leaned forward, his fast-talking energy returning, but tempered by what he'd seen in the Betel-Leaf lantern's glow. "And the younger villagers want to bring new energy. LED lanterns, music, new designs. Not to replace the old, but to add. Traditions must evolve to survive, Nagesh uncle." Before Nagesh could answer, a brisk voice cut through the gentle atmosphere from the terrace stairs. Raghav Parab appeared with the confident stride of a man who always knew where he was going. He checked his watch as he climbed the last step, folded his arms, and looked at the lanterns with an expression that was not unkind, but thoroughly dismissive. "These are pretty," Raghav said, his konkani sharp and matter-of-fact, "but impractical. They tear in the wind, they last one night. Factory-made decorations are cheaper, longer-lasting, easier to install. The committee should consider logistics before sentiment." Nagesh listened with his hands folded, expression unchanged. When Raghav finished, he responded in slow, rhythmic sentences that mirrored the folding of leaves. "Raghav, the lantern is not meant to last. That is the point. The monsoon comes and goes, the lantern burns and is gone. But the act of making it, that stays. The hands that fold, the stories told while folding, the patience learned, that is what the festival keeps. You cannot buy that in a factory. Raghav's arms remained folded, but something in his posture shifted, a slight softening suggesting he had heard, even if he did not yet agree. He checked his watch again, less urgently this time. Priya looked from Nagesh to Raghav to Miguel to Grasa to Asha, then down at the dobra lantern in front of her, nearly complete, its broad leaf folded into a shape that could hold 2 candles. She understood now, not in words but in her hands, that the lanterns were not simple crafts, they were continuity. They were the village saying, "We are here, we remember, we will make this again next year, and the year after that, until the hands that fold forget how, and then someone else would learn." She tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear and picked up the dobra, feeling its weight, its warmth, its imperfect seams. The sea glass Asha had placed beside it caught the candlelight and threw a green shadow onto the terrace floor, a small bridge between the shore and the leaf, between what was broken and what was made whole again. The first lantern glows. The final fold settled with a whisper of leaf against leaf. Priya's fingers lingered, pressing the shape into memory. She had worked slower on this last seam than any other, each crease deliberate, each tuck considered, the way Nagesh had shown her, press, release, let the leaf decide where it wanted to bend. The betel leaf was broad and dark green, its veins running like small rivers across the surface. When she finished, the lantern sat on the cane table looking less like a craft project and more like something that had always belonged there. She lifted it with both hands, careful not to crush the seams, and turned it toward the western edge of the terrace where the last sunlight still clung to the coconut palms. The leaf caught the light and threw a green shadow across the floor, uneven and alive. Priya pressed her palm flat against the side as if checking for warmth. It was cool, of course. Leaf is leaf. But the gesture felt right, the way you might press a hand against a sleeping child's forehead not to measure temperature, but to confirm presence. "Suk," Nagesh said. The word landed on the terrace air like a stone dropped into still water. He had come up behind her without sound, the way old men who have walked the same terrace for 40 years learn to do, and placed his hand on her shoulder, the weight steady and warm to the thin cotton of her kurta. His thumb rested against the seam, rubbing once, twice, the way he always did before folding. He was not inspecting her work so much as acknowledging it. Sukha. Peace. Not the peace of nothing happening, but the peace of something completed slowly, the peace of hands that have learned to wait. A breeze lifted from the sea, soft and salt-heavy, scattering the loose betel leaves Priya had set aside during the weaving, scraps and misfolds, the ones she had pulled away when the seam went wrong or the fold collapsed. They skittered across the terrace floor like small green boats. Priya crouched to gather them, collecting each one with the same deliberate care she had given the lantern itself. She did not toss them aside. She stacked them neatly on the table, studying the pile, the way you might look at small shells after a walk on the beach, not as trash, but as evidence of attention paid. Miguel stood at the railing with his LED prototype in hand, a small waterproof structure of clear plastic and tiny white lights wired together that afternoon. He had been watching Priya's lantern without speaking, his usual fast-talking energy quieted. When he finally turned to his own creation, he smiled in a way that was uncharacteristically still. The LED lantern was bright and technically impressive, but beside the betel-leaf lantern, it looked purchased rather than grown. He did not say this aloud. He simply set his prototype on the table next to Priya's, the two glowing in different keys, one electric and steady, one organic and trembling slightly in the breeze, and understood, without articulating it, that both could sit on the same table without either diminishing the other. Grasa sat in the cane chair near the stairway door, glasses pushed up on her forehead, a small notebook open on her lap. She had taken dozens of photographs earlier, the shutter clicking softly as she captured Nagesh's hands in motion, Priya's concentration, the way the light fell across the leaves, but now she was writing. Her pen moved in small, careful letters. When she paused, she smoothed the edge of her sari absent-mindedly, the way she always did when something required more than documentation. She was not recording visual details, the color of leaves, the angle of light. She was writing about the feeling, the weight of Nagesh's hand on Priya's shoulder, the quiet that fell when the lantern was finished, the way the breeze smelled of salt and crushed betel leaf. The archive would need images, yes, but what it would keep was this, the sensation of peace arriving without announcement, and the knowledge that someone had noticed. Asha sat on the low stool near the table, legs folded beneath her, hands resting in her lap. She had brought nothing except herself and the small piece of sea glass she always carried, green, smooth, worn by tide and time into something that fit perfectly in the palm. She did not speak. She did not need to. She sat with the calm that spoke of, had spent years learning that presence is its own form of contribution. When the lantern light fell across her, the sea glass caught it and threw a small green glow onto the floor, a quiet echo of the larger lantern beside it. Broken things made beautiful again. She had said this once, early in the summer, and Priya had repeated the phrase back as if testing its weight. Now, watching the sea glass glow, Priya understood that Asha had not been speaking metaphorically. Raghav stood at the edge of the terrace with his arms folded, his expression not unkind, but thoroughly pragmatic. He had watched the lantern completion without comment, his watch-checking less frequent than usual. When the breeze scattered the loose leaves, he moved to gather them, not because he valued the scraps, but because disorder bothered him in a way sentiment did not. He stacked them neatly, aligning the edges with the precision that suggested arranges party supplies in bulk boxes, and placed the stack on the corner of the table where it would not be disturbed. He did not look at the lantern. He did not need to. He had heard Nagesh's words about the act of making mattering more than the object itself, and while he did not agree, something in his posture had shifted, a slight softening, a fraction of acknowledgement that efficiency is not the only measure of value. Nagesh's warm smile reflected the golden twilight fading into the deeper blue of evening. He watched Priya's lantern with the expression of a man who has waited a long time and now finds it sufficient. He rubbed the edge of the leaf one final time, his thumb moving along the seam with the familiarity of long practice, then folded his hands in his lap and settled into the cane chair beside her. The coconut frond swayed above, slow and rhythmic. Priya tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear and leaned her head toward Nagesh, her breathing matching the sway of the fronds, the slow inhale and exhale of a person who has found, for a moment, exactly where she is meant to be. The lanterns began to glow softly as twilight deepened, their green surfaces catching the last light like quiet stars awakening one by one. Priya's lantern sat among Nagesh's careful constructions, each a small testament to patience. The light they threw was uneven and alive, trembling in the breeze, casting shadows that moved like small creatures across the terrace floor. The LED prototype sat beside them, bright and steady, the two kinds of light existing together without conflict, each saying something different about what a lantern can be. Nagesh spoke once more about the Sao Joao festival, his voice measured and slow, each sentence placed like a fold. He did not explain the history or the meaning of the candles or the reason for the procession. He spoke instead about the silence that comes after the lantern is lit, the moment when the flame catches, the leaf glows, and the hands that made it rest. He spoke about how the festival is not the lantern itself, but the space around it, the waiting, the making, the sharing. Priya now understood this, not in words, but in her hands, in the way she had pressed her palm against the leaf and felt, if only for a moment, the warmth of something completed without hurry. Priya did not answer. She did not need to. She sat beside Nagesh, her fingers resting on the edge of the table near the lantern, understanding that the stories he told were not separate from the craft he taught. They were the same thing, told in different languages, and she was learning both. The sea hummed in the background, its rhythm matching the slow sway of the coconut fronds. Somewhere in the village, a bell rang for evening prayer, the sound carrying across the terrace like a thread connecting the lantern light to something older than any of them. Nagesh's hand remained on Priya's shoulder, steady and warm. She closed her eyes for a moment, not to sleep, but to feel the weight of it, the presence of it, the peace of it. "Tomorrow," Nagesh said, his voice carrying the weight of generations, "we will light them for the procession, and the village will see what we have made, not just the lanterns, rehearse, but the hands that made them." The Twilight Lullaby. The last betel-leaf lantern caught the light just as the sun surrendered to the sea. Priya held her breath, not from nerves, but from the strange stillness that settles over a place when something finishes exactly as it should. The green leaf glowed amber from within, its seams imperfect but holding, its shape a little lopsided like a heart drawn by a child. She pressed her palm flat against the side, feeling the warmth seep into her skin, and for a moment she understood what Nagesh had been trying to say all along. The lantern was not the object, it was the pause. Night fell quickly after that, the way night falls in Goa, without ceremony, without warning, simply arriving as if it had always been there waiting. The terrace lights clicked on automatically, but nobody reached for the switch. The lanterns were enough. Nagesh settled into his cane chair with the deliberate care of a man who knows his bones. He rubbed his thumb along the edge of the betel leaf one final time, though the lantern was already complete, already lit, already resting on the table between them. His hands folded in his lap. His eyes found the sea. "Tomorrow," he said, and the word carried the weight of 40 years of morning prayers and festival processions, of candle wax dripping onto stone steps, and children running barefoot through the village streets. "We will light them for the procession, and the village will see what we have made, not just the lanterns, Burr, but the hands that made them." Priya didn't answer. She didn't need to. She understood that his words were not instruction, but benediction, and she accepted them the way you accept rain, by standing still beneath it. The sea hummed. A bell rang somewhere in the distance, calling the evening faithful to prayer, its sound threading through the coconut fronds and across the terrace floor. Nagesh's hand found Priya's shoulder, steady and warm, and she leaned into it without thinking, the way a plant turns toward light. Then Nagesh began to hum. It was not a song she recognized, not exactly. The melody rose and fell in the slow, measured rhythm of Konkani speech, each note placed with the same care he used to fold a leaf. It was a lullaby, she realized, though she had never heard him sing one before. His voice carried the memories of his late wife, of 40 years of Sao Joao festivals, of monsoon nights when the village slept beneath the sound of rain on tiled roofs. Priya closed her eyes, not to sleep, but to feel. The humming wrapped around her like something physical, a shawl, a blanket, the weight of a hand on her shoulder. She breathed in, breathed out, matching the slow sway of the coconut fronds above. Her fingers rested on the edge of the table near the lantern, and she pressed her palm flat against its surface once more, feeling the warmth, feeling the life of it. This is what he means, she thought, and the thought came without words, arriving in her chest the way understanding sometimes does, sudden and complete, like stepping from shadow into sun. The lantern isn't the thing you make. It's the thing you become while making it. She opened her eyes and watched the light flicker. It was uneven, alive, trembling in the breeze. The shadows it cast moved like small creatures across the terrace floor, dancing in patterns that no electric light could replicate. Beside it, the LED prototype sat bright and steady, its glow precise and unwavering. The two kinds of light existed together without conflict, each saying something different about what a lantern can be. Miguel sat back against the railing, his energetic presence softened by the night. For once, his fingers were still. He watched the Betel-Leaf lantern with an expression she had never seen on him, something between wonder and surrender. The urgency that usually propelled him forward had dissolved, replaced by a quiet attention that made him seem younger, softer, less certain of the answers he usually carried ready in his mouth. Grasa smoothed the edge of her sari with absent-minded care. She had removed her glasses, and without them, the lanterns became soft orbs of light rather than detailed constructions. She tilted her head, catching the glow on her face, and Priya noticed that Grasa's usual enthusiasm, the need to photograph, to document, to preserve, had quieted. She was watching, simply watching, and in that watching, she was preserving something that no camera could capture. Asha reached into her pocket and drew out the piece of sea glass she had been carrying all evening. She ran her fingers over its smooth surface one final time, feeling the edges worn soft by the sea, and then she placed it gently beside a lantern, where the light would shine through it and turn it into something new. The glass glowed green and gold, transformed by the lantern's warmth, and Priya thought of what Asha had said earlier, that broken things can become beautiful again. Raghav checked his watch. It was a reflex, an old habit that even the night could not entirely disarm. He folded his arms across his chest and settled into his chair with the brisk efficiency of a man who measures worth in minutes. But then Nagesh's humming reached him, and something in his posture shifted. The sharp angles of his shoulders softened. His eyes, usually scanning for the bottom line, found the lantern and stayed there. He did not speak. He did not need to. The lullaby wrapped around him the way it wrapped around all of them, and for once he allowed himself to be wrapped. The terrace was silent now, except for the hum of Nagesh's voice and the gentle rhythm of the sea. The coconut fronds swayed above them, slow and steady, casting shadows that moved like breathing. The lanterns flickered, their green surfaces glowing with the quiet beauty of impermanence. Each one was different, some taller, some shorter, some with seams that showed, some with edges that curled. But together they created a constellation of light that no factory could replicate. Priya whispered something then, so softly that only Nagesh could hear. She repeated a fragment of one of his stories, a phrase about the silence after the lantern is lit, about the moment when the flame catches and the leaf glows and the hands that made it rest. She tested the weight of it in the night air, feeling how the words fit in her mouth, how they carried the same warmth as the lantern beside her. Nagesh smiled. It was a small smile, the kind that lives in the eyes more than the mouth, and it carried the satisfaction of a man who has waited a long time and now finds it sufficient. He did not correct her pronunciation or praise her effort. He simply nodded once and continued to hum. The night deepened around them, wrapping the terrace like a warm blanket. The lanterns continued to flicker, their light uneven and alive, casting shadows that moved like small creatures across the floor. Priya leaned her head toward Nagesh, her breathing matching the sway of the fronds, the slow inhale and exhale of a person who has found, for a moment, exactly where she is meant to be. Tomorrow, the village would see what they had made. Tomorrow, the lanterns would light the procession, and the candles would burn, and the children would run barefoot through the streets. But tonight, there was only this: the hum of Nagesh's voice, the glow of the lanterns, the warmth of a hand on a shoulder, the peace of a moment that would not last but would be remembered. The sea hummed, the fronds swayed, the lanterns flickered like quiet stars awakening one by one in the dark, and the night sang its lullaby over Assagao.